UFO sightings, a mysterious spymaster, and a fake doctor. There's a lot people don't know about the Korean War, and some of it just doesn't make sense. Nearly 5 years after the end of World War II, the United States and China found themselves tangled in another brutal conflict, this time on the Korean Peninsula. One of the biggest enigmas to come out of the war was a man named Donald Nichols. A remorseless operative able to watch mass killings and torture with cold indifference, Nichols proved himself to be the ultimate spymaster. He was also able to make some very cold decisions. Nichols and his team of spies supplied most of the bombing targets for the US military during the conflict. Author Blaine Harden, who penned King of Spies, The Dark Reign of America's Spymaster in Korea, writes that Nichols actually predicted a Korean Civil War and warned higher-ups months before June 1950. Shortly after the war began, Nichols found himself at the center of arguably the conflict's greatest intelligence victory when he came across a North Korean defector who had stolen military code books in his possession. How all this could be attributed to a single man is puzzling. Nichols was a 7th grade dropout who grew up in poverty. He joined the military to survive, had no Ivy League or Pentagon connections, and showed up in Korea in 1946 with no support. And then he just happened to become buddies with South Korean leader Syngman Rhee. Their friendship launched Nichols' intelligence career into a different stratosphere and raises a lot of questions about him that his background on paper really doesn't answer.
Well, he was smart, he was ruthless, and he was brave.
Lots of things are flying around in the sky during war, but the Korean War featured quite a few instances that nobody could explain. On January 29, 1952, the crew of an American B-29 bomber reported seeing a floating disc-shaped object while flying a late-night mission over Wonsan. The crew noted that the object looked orange and also sported bluish flames around its odd shape. When the object was spotted, the bomber was more than 20,000 feet in the air and going nearly 200 miles per hour. A blurry shape spotted under these circumstances could easily be discounted, except for one problem. A completely separate B-29 bomber nearly 100 miles away also reported seeing a strange flying object, except this crew claimed it was more globe-shaped, which is equally weird. And if this wasn't strange enough, the year before, in May, a group of American troops claimed to have encountered a jack-o'-lantern-shaped object while readying to launch artillery on a village. The aircraft was allegedly undamaged in the midst of artillery strikes and rifle fire. It reportedly moved side to side and emitted flashing lights. Some of them even reported some kind of ray or beam being emitted from the aircraft. You might never have heard of him, but Fernando Waldo Demara Jr. might be the Michael Jordan of stealing identities. Demara made his way through life, wading through numerous careers and impersonating countless people, but his most notorious and egregious con came during the Korean War. During the war, he pretended to be a doctor after making copies of a Canadian friend's immigration paperwork. The Massachusetts-born Demara was able to enlist in the Canadian Navy under his friend's name, Dr. Joseph Sear, and served aboard a destroyer in Korea as a commissioned officer. Demara's stint as a doctor would culminate in him treating 3 Korean refugees, one of whom needed to have a leg amputated. Shockingly, Demara successfully performed the procedure. However, the good press Demara received for his efforts earned the attention of the real Sear's mother. After she saw a photo of Demara posing as her son, the lie came to light, and he was forced to return to the US. But that doesn't mean he changed his ways. Before long, he went right back to stealing identities just for the love of the game. What makes Demara's stint in the Korean War so puzzling is that the incident was his 3rd time fooling military officials. Prior to joining Canadian naval ranks, Demara enlisted in the US Army in 1941, went AWOL, and stole a friend's identity to join the Navy, where he received basic medical training. After higher-ups discovered some of Demara's phony paperwork, he faked his death. His 2 desertions caught up with him in 1945 when he was caught and made to spend 18 months in prison. Sometimes prison revolts work. U.S. Army Brigadier General Francis Dodd found that out the hard way. Dodd served as the commander of a prisoner of war camp on Gojedo Island. On May 7, 1952, Dodd was surrounded by a group of North Korean prisoners and taken hostage. He was released 3 days later, only after their demands for more humane treatment were seemingly guaranteed. The prison compounds on the island had a volatile reputation. Riots were not entirely uncommon. The prison population was understandably unhappy, and before the incident with Dodd, there had been another instance of a colonel being taken hostage, so it's not like this had happened before. North Korean POWs, it turned out, were pretty good at taking their jailers hostage in order to improve their conditions. Direct action gets the goods. The POWs were helped by lax security at the camp. Gates of the compound were often left unlocked for endless comings and goings of different work details, And that lazy approach to security is exactly how the POWs were able to seize Dodd. Dodd also seems to have been a pretty trusting guy, recklessly so. Dodd reportedly arrived for a meeting with the prisoners on May 7th unarmed, meeting them by an unlocked sally port. While Dodd was not harmed in the incident, his career was effectively ruined, with the ordeal proving pretty embarrassing for military leadership. American intelligence during the initial stages of the Korean War was nothing short of abysmal. Before June 1950, little was done to heed South Korean warnings regarding communist forces gearing up to cross the 38th parallel. The newly formed CIA seemingly blew off its own intelligence reports that warned of North Korean military buildup. When Kim Il-sung finally made his move, only a hasty, disorganized, and unprepared intervention from American troops stationed in Japan was able to halt a total North Korean takeover of the peninsula. One would think this ordeal would make American intelligence hyper-aware and a lot more hawkish in the future. However, as the months rolled by, American leadership still wasn't listening to info on the ground. General Douglas MacArthur himself expressed extreme confidence that China would not enter the conflict. His mindset was that even if Mao's forces did join the fighting, they'd be easily thrown back. Well, Mao's forces did intervene in late October, and they drew UN troops into a hellacious firefight for the remainder of the year. This prevented North Korean capitulation and prolonged the war for years. One of the most bewildering moments of the Korean War was when General Douglas MacArthur thought it was a good idea to become embroiled in a rather public rivalry with President Harry Truman over how the United States should proceed with the conflict. Truman was none too pleased with MacArthur in the war's early going, especially after those personal assurances about China. By the spring of 1951, Chinese forces had turned back UN momentum and a stalemate began forming along the 38th parallel. MacArthur wanted to start employing more aggressive strategies, such as bombing China and allowing nationalist Chinese troops from Taiwan into the war. Such moves, Truman feared, would escalate the conflict into something far more global. MacArthur, never one to shy away from letting his opinions be known, ended up writing a letter in March 1951 to the Republican Speaker of the House, in which he essentially tossed Truman's wartime strategy under the bus. By April 11th, the general was officially relieved of his duties.
I was through with him.
For a long while, the official recorded number of Americans killed during the Korean War was listed as 54,246. This figure was written into history books and etched onto monuments, including the granite of the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Nowadays, the official number of Americans who died during the war is stated to be much lower at around 36,516. That's a difference of nearly 18,000. So what caused this discrepancy? Apparently, it all came down to a simple clerical error. That error added all worldwide non-combat fatalities to the number of Korean War deaths, meaning that during this time period, a serviceman dying in Europe of non-combat causes was counted among the number of Americans killed in Korea. By 1989, Pentagon officials had decided to own up to the mistake and began revising numbers. So if you think you messed up at work today, it could be worse. This mistake was literally historic. Taking place between World War II and the Vietnam War, the Korean War is often overshadowed by those conflicts. It is commonly referred to as the Forgotten War, which many historians find baffling, because this was not a minor conflict. Historians have estimated that between 2 and 3 million North and South Korean civilians were killed during the conflict. According to scholars, this means that the percentage of civilian casualties in the Korean War likely eclipses that of World War II and the Vietnam War. During the war, American air campaigns likely saw about 635,000 tons of bombs dropped onto the Korean peninsula. These bombings, which were primarily concentrated in the north and included over 32,000 tons of napalm, are comparable to the number of bombs dropped on Japan during World War II. To this day, these airstrikes continued to serve as a significant cornerstone for state propaganda. They helped shape the North Korean national identity and have fueled justification for the country's anti-American, anti-Western policies. With the Korean War being such a brutal and bloody struggle, and with its aftermath still playing a crucial part in geopolitics today, there's just no good reason to regard it as a war worth forgetting.